Good evening and welcome to our Waltham Public Library program, Tips for Your College Search. My name is Deborah Hoffman and I organize programs and events for the library. Thanks for tuning in. Before we start, I want to let you know how the evening will go. Our speaker will do a 45-minute presentation and then she'll field questions. To ask questions via the chat function, use a Google account to sign into YouTube. Feel free to write your questions at any time, and then I'll read them at the end of the presentation. Dr. Karen Droisen is the founder of KAD Tutoring, providing college counseling to high school students. She earned her BA in English from Barnard College, Columbia University, and then an MA and PhD in English literature at the University of Virginia. After completing her doctorate at UVA, she joined the University of Nevada, Las Vegas as a tenure-track English professor. In the following years, Dr. Droisen was a fundraiser for local and international nonprofit organizations. She has been a full-time tutor and college counselor since 2015. With her help, Karen's students have been admitted to top colleges, including Penn State, Elon University, UMass Amherst, and many, many more. You can learn more about her work at kadtutoring.com. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Droisen.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. So tonight, my goal is to demystify somewhat the college search process because it can seem very overwhelming, and indeed there are many details that have to be managed. So what I'm going to do is provide an overview of the process chronologically to, I hope, break it down into more manageable components. So the college search actually should begin in junior year, and in fact, right around this time of year. For the spring of junior year, it's important to take a good look at the classes that your student will be taking next year. Remember, the admissions board at the colleges to which you apply are going to see the schedule, and they're going to be looking for rigor and for a variety of classes, so not just all in one subject. And it's important to remember that the admissions officers will have a profile of the student's school. So they will know how many AP classes, for example, are offered at your school. So they'll be able to see how you're taking advantage of the resources that your school has. So if your school doesn't offer many AP courses, they will know that as well. And they'll be able to see the ones that you took with the understanding that you took advantage of everything that was there. Now, the summer before senior year, just around the corner for us, is very important, and students and their parents should think carefully about what the student can do to really showcase their abilities. Many students work full-time all summer long, and that's absolutely fine. It impresses admissions officers because it shows that you're a good collaborator, you're responsible, you work hard. So all of those factors are a terrific thing to showcase in your application. There are also many academic programs out there lasting anywhere from a week to 6 weeks. You want to look for programs that have a competitive admissions process. In other words, there are dozens and dozens of options that are pay to play. In other words, there's no admissions process at all. You want to look for competitive ones. Those will be the most impressive. If you're traveling, keep a travel journal. You can come up with some wonderful essay topics through it. And finally, there are testing boot camps available, probably year round, but especially in the summer. I don't recommend doing these. Most colleges, the majority of colleges now are test optional, meaning you don't have to submit your scores. And there's a whole industry around test prep in this country, and it's becoming less and less relevant. The testing boot camps can be very, very stressful for the student, and I always recommend finding something more worthwhile and rewarding to do for the summer. No matter how rigorous the test camp is, typically scores are raised only about 100 points on average. And that's not going to make the difference to getting into a college or not. So I recommend avoiding them. So in June before senior year, so just a few weeks from now, students can look at the Common Apt prompts for ideas, and they need to start thinking about their college essay in terms of the values that they want to capture. So what are your values? You need to reflect on those. And how will you capture them? So you're going to essentially work backwards when you're writing the personal statement. What do you want to capture about yourself? And then decide how to do it. There's a wonderful resource online, collegeessayguide.com, which has many useful tutorials and online and webinars that you can take for virtually every step of the process. It also has a very good introduction to financial aid. Definitely worth taking a look at. So part of the essay writing process is a self-assessment to really identify the college environment that's going to be best suited for you. So in doing these self-assessments, the student comes to understand where they're going to fit in, and that's going to influence the writing of the essay. Self-assessments address very basic questions that you need to narrow down your college search. Currently, there are about 3,000 colleges in the United States alone, and anything you can do to narrow down your list is very important. So the questions are really very simple, logistical ones. You want a large or small college? Are you interested in Greek life? Where do you want it to be? And so on and so forth. There are many useful sites to begin the school research in which you can build your own custom search that includes the aspects that you identify through the self-assessment. The sites that I like to use are Big Future, College Countdown, College Data, and even the Common App has a search function. Unfortunately, none of these 4 sites have all of the information that I like to use. So typically when I'm researching school, I have 4 or 5 tabs open on my browser. Each one of these will contain slightly different information. So it's certainly worth spending some time looking at all of them. So as the summer goes on, the goal is always to finish the personal statement by the end of August. I really can't overemphasize the value of doing this. To be able to have enough time to revise over and over again to really polish your writing is, absolutely critical to producing a successful essay. And since the student will be back in school in September, juggling classes and other responsibilities, it's very important to take advantage of the summer and have your writing done by the end of August. So since the students and their families have been researching schools alongside the writing of the personal statement, it's time to create a semifinal list of roughly 10 to 12 schools. So I'm often asked, how many schools should I apply to? And I often hear about students applying to 20, 25, or 30 schools. The maximum that I would recommend is 12. And so, there's no value really in applying to dozens of schools if you know nothing about them and they're not a school you'd ever really attend. All that does is create extra work for you. So really think carefully about your list of schools and keep it short. There are many great options to making that SemiFinal List. You want to use all the media you can to learn about it. There are virtual tours that are typically on the school's website. Keep in mind that those are promotional videos, so they're going to show the school in its best light. There are student-made tours that you can find on YouTube and Campus Reel. You can also look at TikTok and Reddit for more information. TikTok can be especially good for things like a day in the life of a student at X university. You can also find on Instagram little short snippets like that, so you can get more of a flavor for what student life is really like. Of course, you always have to keep in mind the source. These are completely subjective, but it can be really fun to watch these videos. The Common App opens on August 1st. So go ahead, go in there and create your account right away. There's no point in waiting, and it has a function in which you can add schools to a list. So you can, add all of the schools that are on your semifinal list so that you can go to those applications with just a click. So in September of senior year, it's time to finalize the list. As I said, 12 I recommend is the absolute maximum. I think 8 to 10 is probably ideal. Some schools will have a supplemental essay or two required for their applications. These can be very involved, and so it's important to find out as soon as the Common App opens on August 1st, whether your schools have supplementals, and if they do, what they are, so that you can start writing them. At this point, it's very, very important to do the administrative stuff, requesting letters of recommendations from your teachers. Teachers will not appreciate it if you wait until the night before a deadline to request them. So doing it sooner rather than later is really critical to ensure your application gets in on time. You'll also need to think about submitting standardized test scores if you've taken them. As I said, many schools are test score optional, meaning you don't have to submit them even if you've taken them. So the process of making that decision is important. You need to think about whether your scores will really impress the admissions officer. If they're not really spectacular, there's no point in submitting. And, time permitting, visit schools. Each school will have a recruiter that's assigned to your geographic area. You can ask them to connect you to a current student, a great way to get inside information. If you visit in person, you'll want to take one of their official tours, but also have time to kind of wander around and get a feel for campus. And think about all factors that'll play into daily life, things like public transportation and the neighborhood. Does it have the resources that you want, for example? So in October and November of senior year, deadlines are coming fast and furious. You need to submit your financial aid form. The federal financial aid form is what most schools use. However, there are some schools that use what's called the CSS profile. So check as soon as the Common App opens what your schools require. Most students end up filling out both of them. You want to follow up on your teachers to make sure that your letters of recommendation are in there and that you've submitted the scores that you want to. And the deadlines start coming. November 1st, many schools have early action and early decision deadlines. So for your top schools, you might, if your application is done, go ahead and apply early action. That will get you a decision usually within 8 weeks, which is much faster than waiting for regular decision. Just be sure that your application is as strong as possible. It's much better to submit a great application for regular decision than a not so great application for early action. Now, just a word about the two. Early decision is binding, meaning you are in effect signing a contract to go to that school. So you can only apply to one school early decision. The admissions rates for early decision are typically higher. It's a more competitive pool of applicants. So you have to think carefully whether you want to apply early decision. You have to know exactly what your top school is if you're going to do that. Now, for decades, it's been a binding decision. You're sort of promising, you're signing a contract to go to the school if you apply ED. Now, however, there's a loophole. If the school you apply to early decision accepts you, you are not bound to go there if they can't meet the financial need of your family. So there's now that loophole. You can decline on the grounds that they're not offering you a financial aid package that will enable you to go there. Early action is non-binding, so you can apply to as many early action schools as you like. So the early action and early decision deadlines typically start November 1st, and they run through usually to the middle of December. And then regular decision deadlines start typically January 1st and run for the next few months. So in December and March of senior year, you'll be submitting your regular decision applications, and ideally, time permitting, you'll be visiting your top choice schools. So January through May of senior year, the student will have submitted all of their applications, visited all the schools that they possibly can, and will be reviewing acceptances, which is very exciting. May 1st is the deadline for making a commitment to a school. The factors that you need to consider are financial aid. You'll have to think about whether you've budgeted all your projected expenses, travel, whether you need a car on campus, et cetera. This is really important to go through this with a fine-tooth comb before you decide whether you can afford a particular school or not. You'll also have to think about housing. Typically, housing is guaranteed for freshman students. It often has a separate deadline or two, separate from the commitment day on May 1st. So go through the school information very carefully. If you miss a housing deadline, it can often be impossible to get housing. And finally, celebrate. Once you have gone through all of your acceptances, you've gone through all of your financial aid information, you've thought about all of your top schools, review your acceptances and celebrate. It's a tremendous accomplishment. So thank you all very much. I've also included some resources in my slideshow. These are some of my favorite sites for researching colleges, financial aid, and they really, as I said, I often have several open at once on my browser, but they'll really enable you to get a more complete picture of the schools. So those are my favorites, and I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Droisen, for that.
That's my pleasure.
For that sort of month by month overview of the whole process. It was great. It was great to see it laid out like that. We do have some questions.
It's important to demystify it.
Yes, definitely. We do have some questions for you, so I want to get to those. And I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen or not. One person wants to know if you know of any clothing design schools that you can recommend.
That is a great question. This past year, I've worked with a student who wanted to build a career in fashion merchandising, so layouts for photo shoots, things like that. So I have learned a little bit about that field. The school that's probably most famous is FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. You might also take a look at Johnson and Wales University. which is in Providence. And I think, let's see, it might take a little bit of clicking, but I think you should be able to find some more schools if you use some of the sites that I was just talking about, the resources. But I would say FIT is probably the most prestigious. And then Johnson and Wales is definitely worth a look as well. They give a very nice financial aid package to my student who got in there this past year.
And do those schools offer a BA as a degree, or is it a different type of degree?
Yeah, so it really depends on the school. Let's see, I've seen some programs that will get you an associate's degree. FIT has that option. They'll get you, so it's an AA or an AAS. But other schools have a 4-year BA option. And so it takes, you need to take some time really thinking about what track is going to be right for you. And always, always, always call the school when you have questions. You'll find that professors are very, very happy to talk about their classes, and the admissions office is there to help you. So any questions, go ahead and call.
That's a great tip. Let's see. Someone else suggested the Rhode Island School of Design.
Sure, very prestigious.
Yeah.
Very challenging to get into.
Here's a question. Regarding applications, actively engaged kids have a lot to enhance an application. But do you have any recommendations for a kid who doesn't participate in school extracurricular activities?
So that's a great question. I mean, some students work 30 hours a week, and so they simply don't have time for, a major commitment to extracurriculars. Schools definitely like to see them. So if you don't have a lot of them on your application, it's important that the rest of the application be as strong as possible. And that's going to mean that your essay really is absolutely the most important thing. When you're writing your essay, think about the aspects of your life that show off the skills that you develop in extracurricular activities. For example, you might want to describe situations in which you're collaborating with others. Maybe you had a terrific experience with a group project in your chemistry class. That might make a great subject for an essay to show off to the school that you're a team player, that you're good at compromising, you're good at coming up with solutions, you're good at collaborating with others. That's typically what extracurriculars will showcase. So it's important to find another way to bring those out. And you could also, in asking for letters of recommendation, just explain the situation to your teacher and say, I'd love it if you could find a way to talk about my group work or something like that in your letter. You just want to make sure that you're showcasing those aspects of your capabilities.
That's interesting. So schools are looking at extracurricular activities because they want to see how well you work with other students? Is that sort of their primary lens?
I think that's really what it comes down to. They want to know if you're going to be an active participant in school life. Are you going to be an engaged student who enjoys collaborating with others, who will participate in, in a frank exchange of views and a class discussion? What are you going to bring to the classroom as a student? And the skills to being an active student are very much those that you often learn in things like sports, where you have to learn to obviously be part of the team. So, you've got to find a way to showcase them if you don't have a lot of extracurriculars.
Got it. Here's another recommendation for a design school, Parsons School of Design in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, these are all wonderful. They're very competitive. Some of them require a portfolio. So if you were going for that, you'd have to do some careful thinking about, building your portfolio. Definitely something you want to collaborate on with one of your art teachers.
Great advice. You've been doing this for a long time. I wondered if you could talk about what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen parents in particular, actually parents and teens make in this process.
Yeah, that's a great question. You don't want it to be January and you're looking back and thinking, wow, I wish I had done this differently. So I think probably the most common mistake is not starting early enough in the process. I emphasize in my presentation all of the great things that you can get done over the summer. And it's really critical that the personal statement be finished by the end of August before all the craziness of school starts up. And since the Common App opens on August 1st, you can also go in there and find out which of your colleges has supplemental essays. And you can write those during August. So I think, it's never too early to start. So I think starting early is really the most critical factor for success. Another challenge I think that people like me, but certainly parents and students face, is building a balanced list. The student may have unrealistic expectations of the schools to which they might get into. They may simply be aiming too low. And so a careful reading of school standards, I think, is really critical. If you aim too low, you're going to miss out. So it's important to have a list that's balanced. Typically, I recommend a couple of reach schools. So those are schools to which you'd have a low possibility of admittance. Typically, these are the most selective schools, the Ivies, the Ivy Plus schools. The biggest part of your list should be schools to which you have a good chance of getting in. So you can call those target schools. And those are schools in which your record, your GPA, is comparable to the GPA of the class admitted before you. So I hope that's clear. And these are schools that, look like a great match for you as far as student life goes. Are they going to have, are they in a city if you want to be in a city? All of those factors play in. And so that's going to be the bulk of your list. You also want to have what is called safety schools or high probability schools. And those are schools for which you would really stand out as an applicant. For example, your GPA might be much higher than the average for the students admitted the previous year. So I would say that coming up with an unbalanced list is setting up the student for failure, unfortunately. So I've seen a range. I've seen lists that certainly aren't ambitious enough and lists that simply aren't realistic. The admissions rates for the Ivies and the Ivy Plus schools like Stanford and MIT, those admissions rates are below 10%. So everyone who's applying has an amazing GPA and has taken all of these APs, and it's very, very hard to make yourself stand out. So it's important, I think, to be realistic and make sure that you have, you're being realistic in your choices for your target schools, and you've got some safety schools on your list as well. That's why building the list is really critical to success.
Building the right list.
Building the right list, yeah.
Let's see. The question is, what's the Common App?
Oh, the Common App. Okay. The Common App is an absolute godsend for students. As the name suggests, it's an application that's used by probably 80% of colleges use the Common App. It's a website. It's web-based, of course. You create an account, so it will save all of the work that you do. And it's a form, much like you filled out probably 10 million times. You only have to enter your personal information once, which is terrific. You don't have to do it 12 times, and it'll save that information. You will eventually copy and paste in your personal statement. You'll find information on supplemental essays if the schools have any of those. And you will enter the like sort of the names and descriptions of each of your extracurricular activities. So it's a web-based platform used by most schools. And although it can be a little bit clunky in ways, it actually functions extremely well. So definitely open up that account right away so you can become familiar with it. And in my experience, it's almost impossible to make a mistake and click submit by accident. So you shouldn't have any fears about that.
But you do submit your application through the Common App.
Yeah, you submit your application through the Common App unless the school has its own app, which fewer and fewer schools have. There's also a coalition app, which is a different web platform. But what you'll do with the Common App is you'll complete the basic information that all the schools want. Where you went to high school, what your address is, the very basic stuff. And then, when that's complete, you'll select the schools to which you want to submit it. You're not going to submit all on the same day. That's fine. So you can submit it, obviously for each school, you can do them one at a time, or you can do 2 or 3 at a time. So it's a web-based platform that saves, millions of hours and actually works pretty well. So it's actually open now for the previous year. You can take a look at what it looks like now, and then August 1st, open up your account for the upcoming year.
Great tip. Here's a question. If you don't get admitted to a school by the end of May, can you try again?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's see, most schools will have their decisions out well before May. If you apply regular decision, which typically means a January or February deadline, you'll know by sometime in April. And if you've made a good list, you will have acceptances to celebrate, but you can certainly try again the following year. I don't typically recommend that unless you have a plan for a really good gap year and you're going to accomplish something that's truly meaningful. But sure, you can certainly try again the following year.
But what would you advise a student who doesn't get into any of their schools?
That's a great question. I mean, there's many thousands of students will start out at a community college and then apply to transfer after a couple of years. In Massachusetts, we are truly blessed with an outstanding higher education system. And so I would certainly recommend that the student find a community college or even a continuing education program and enroll and start taking classes then. This actually changes the admission game substantially. Once you've taken 2 or 3 classes at a community college, say, you're no longer considered a freshman applicant. You're considered a transfer student. And you'll have to fill out like the same type of application, but you're going to be in a different pool of applicants. The downside to that is you typically will not get as much financial aid as you need. So, there are definitely pluses and minuses. On the plus side, you get college experience, you get to maybe dip your toe in, try some subjects that you think would be good for you. On the flip side, it is a different application process. And the financial aid might just not be there for you.
Okay. And is it typically easier to transfer into a school than maybe to get in as a freshman?
No, I certainly wouldn't say that. It depends on the school. Again, I think in Massachusetts, the level of difficulty is probably the same if you started a community college and then transfer to UMass Amherst, just for example. And that's because you're an in-state applicant. But I wouldn't say it's easier. It can be very tricky because if you've taken college courses at a local school and then you want to transfer to Harvard, say, Harvard may not accept all of the credits you've already earned at the community college that you went to. So you may end up having to, take similar classes again, and there's, nothing wrong with that. But you have to consider it very carefully and spend, some significant time on the phone with the admissions office to find out what credits they're going to accept from the first school that you go to. You can end up losing time essentially and having to retake courses you've already taken, which might delay graduation by a year. So, it really requires a lot of scrutiny.
Okay. Let's see. This is just a comment. A friend has taken classes at Mass Art in Boston, the Mass College of Art and Design. This is more advice for the person who's interested in clothing design.
Oh, terrific.
What would you say, what advice do you have for parents to help them reduce their teens' anxiety?
Sure. Well, it's going to depend on the teen, obviously, but I think the most important thing parents can do is encourage the student without putting pressure on them. There are, as I said, around 3,000 colleges in the country, and your child's life is not going to be ruined if they don't get into, the most prestigious school. So there's a book called Where You Go Is Not Who You Are. And that's 100% true. It's certainly worth looking at. Going to an Ivy is not a ticket for a great life by any means. And going to a state school can be a wonderful experience. So I think the most important thing is not to get caught up in the prestige, not to say that, a student's friend got into MIT, and so that's what you should shoot for. Finding the right school is very much about fit, and the college's name recognition has nothing to do with whether it's a good fit for your student. And furthermore, in the Northeast, we are absolutely overwhelmed with the number of great schools to go to. And parents can also encourage the student to look a little further afield. There are some wonderful colleges that are part of sort of a consortium called Colleges That Change Lives. And it's a group of smaller liberal arts colleges all over the country that are, just absolutely wonderful places. They might not have immediate name recognition. They might be the perfect fit for your student. So I would say not getting stuck on prestige and brand names, and instead focusing on fit is the best way to support your student.
Great advice. Let's see. This commenter says, I heard of a program where college in Massachusetts is free when you go to community college. Is that true? Is community college free? Do you know?
I honestly don't know what the status is of that legislation. There's been a lot sort of swirling around. I think 2 years of a community college might be free, but it's certainly worth looking into on I guess it would be the DOE, the State Department of Education website. So it would certainly be wonderful if it were free. I have a feeling it's only 2 years, but there have been a lot of changes. Okay. So it's certainly worth looking at.
Great. They added a comment that you're supposed to maintain a certain average, right, and that the idea is to transfer into a four-year college.
Yeah, and maintaining a certain, Massachusetts has some wonderful financial aid options for its state schools. But often they'll have a component of you have to maintain a certain GPA. And so, some of them renew annually. So you might get a package that's for 4 years, $10,000 a year. But you really have to make sure that you're capable of maintaining the GPA that they're going to require, because they can give it, they can take it away.
This person wants to know if college credits are negotiable when you transfer into school. So if you take some colleges at a community college and then transfer to a new school, is that a negotiation with the new school or not?
Ideally, it's a negotiation. You often have to exchange some information with the new school. For example, they might ask you to provide a syllabus so that they can figure out whether the class you took is comparable to a similar one that they offer. The more similar they are, the more likely they are to give you credit for something you've taken at another institution. As far as how negotiable it is, in my experience, colleges are pretty strict about the credits that they're going to accept from another university. So, I think that it's definitely important to be proactive, find out who the head of transfer admissions is at a school you're interested in. And before you even start the process, call or email them and say, here's my situation. Can you give me a sense of how your school would handle my application? So I guess it's negotiable to a degree, but you will often be called on to provide more information.
Okay. How would one determine what makes for a good fit for a school? What should kids and parents look for when considering schools?
That's the $64 billion question. The first place to start is with a self-assessment that will narrow down your choices. Something as simple as, do you want to be in a city? You want to go to college right in the middle of downtown? Or do you want a rural setting? Do you want to be, so way out in a college campus that's secluded, that's, sort of perfectly contained, that's kind of its own world, way out in the sticks? Or do you want something in between? Do you want a suburban setting? So, narrowing down the choice before you start looking at colleges is really critical. Some students would absolutely love to be in the middle of New York City for college. They're a fairly small percentage. And so before you even start thinking about particular schools, you have to go over these questions in a very thoughtful and careful way. The first big screening question is, what part of the country do you want to be in? How far do you want to be from home? Do you want to be a day trip away from home? Or are you open to living anywhere in the country? So asking the very basic questions is the way to build a good list and find a school or schools typically where your student will match. So don't be distracted by, this is another I think good example of not getting distracted by brand names. You shouldn't be choosing a school based on its reputation. If you go to UMass Amherst has, 28,000 undergraduates. There are schools that have 400 undergraduates and everything in between. If your student really wants a school with lots of personal attention, lots of interaction with professors, you want a smaller college, say 4,000 kids, right around there. And that's what I mean by fit. A student who wants a huge school, who wants, for example, D1 sports, wants a big football team, is not going to be happy in a school that's much smaller. And a student who really wants those personal interactions, those very small classes, is simply not going to be happy in a big, large university, and probably doesn't really care about D1 sports anyway. So that's what I mean when I talk about fit and not getting distracted by brand names. You want to sort of throw schools overboard as quickly as you can, ruling out the ones that aren't going to be absolutely great for your student.
Our listener thanked you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, I guess I don't see any other questions from the audience. Have you ever had a situation where a student has gotten into a school and then the school has closed? Because we've had a couple of smaller schools in this area close very abruptly.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that that's a scary situation to be in.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I haven't had any students in that very difficult situation. There's some college counselors, which is, what I do, obviously, who recommend checking things like the school's financials. So how big is their endowment? Are they running, are they balancing their budget? Are they running at a loss? Are they getting big grants or not? Are their professors really churning out research, or have things kind of died down? I mean, I don't know how useful that research is. I mean, it's certainly important to learn about the school. And I think I would advise a student, if a school looks like it's in trouble, I would advise them to apply elsewhere. But that being said, I would expect that if a school closes and a student applies to transfer to another school, I would expect that the school to which they want to transfer is relatively understanding, of the circumstances. So I think that, that might be the only silver lining in it. So yeah, I guess I've been lucky. My students have looked at other places, but it's absolutely worth just spending some time on Google, finding out the school's reputation. Just be sure that you're looking at reliable sources when you're researching a school, especially on Google. It's much too easy to find unreliable sources that will simply not be useful in helping you with your decision.
Yeah, that's a great tip. How do you know that a school is providing you accurate information about itself?
Schools are audited. And I mean, like, they're not really a business, but like other organizations, they do have to submit to audits. I can't really imagine a school falsifying financials. I just find it hard to believe. However, there have been examples recently, very recently, of a dean getting really fixating on the US News and World Report's rankings, which I put almost no stock in. I have a personal bias against them. But people tend to count them very heavily. And there was a dean at Temple for the business school who fudged an awful lot of numbers, so that the number of students that they reported as working full-time, like the percentage that had full-time jobs after graduation, they fudged numbers so that that percentage would be much higher. So as a result, Temple Business School went from being ranked probably in the 30s or the 40s nationally to all of a sudden being like number 11. And that was it was entirely due to the dean, and I'm sure members of his team sort of fudging the numbers, maybe double counting things. I'm not really sure. So, maybe that's another reason not to put much stock in the various ranking systems that are out there. So I don't know how easy it is for administrators to get caught, but it certainly does happen. So thinking more about fit is really where you should go with this.
Well, and it sounds like the situation that you're talking about is, if they do get caught, it will make the news. So
it is. And the dean quite naturally had to step down in disgrace. So yeah, so I mean, I would trust the school's financials. I'd be skeptical about the various rankings, the Princeton Review, US News and World Reports. I would take those with a grain of salt.
Okay.
Or ignore them entirely.
Wow. Okay. I think that's it for our questions from our audience. It is almost 8 o'clock. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank everyone who watched and asked all those fantastic questions.
Yeah, they were terrific. It was a great pleasure, and I especially appreciate the smart questions that we got tonight. Yeah, people were really thinking about it. Well, it's time to start thinking. It's already May. Yes. So thank you. It was wonderful hosting you. My pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in tonight. I hope you have a good evening. Bye-bye.